Hi everyone, it's Annalisa for our discussion 4.3 about euthanasia and assisted suicide. The first question in this discussion is what arguments can be used to support law or policy allowing withholding of treatment or assisted suicide? So for law or policy allowing withholding of treatment, so not continuing any more treatment with the attempt to treat a terminal illness or assisted suicide. Those are not really the same thing. Ending treatment just means that you are no longer intervening and you're allowing a disease process to run its course. It's not the same thing as assisted suicide. You're not actually taking the action of ending a life. You're just allowing the disease process to end the life. That is a little bit more of a difficult issue when a person is, when their autonomy can be questionable, like if the patient is a minor child or the patient is, let's say someone with an intellectual disability or someone who's like has a guardianship situation in place. Because it can't necessarily be determined what that person's wishes would be for themselves, and so you are often in a situation to have to do everything possible to attempt to treat a disease. One of the previous videos that we watched in this course talking about medicine in America today, there was a scenario where the parents of a little girl had leukemia and she was just going through these painful treatments that were prolonging the quantity of her life but ruining the quality of her life, and her parents said that they wanted to just withhold any additional treatment so that she wouldn't be in pain from the treatments, and they were threatened with lawsuits by the physicians because the physicians were worried about liability if she did not continue treatment. So there are, some scenarios where it's questionable whether or not parents can withhold treatment from a child. In a situation where I think the child is obviously dying and the treatment is just prolonging the suffering, I think the parents should be able to withhold additional treatment. In a scenario where the child could have life-saving treatment with something like a blood transfusion, but the parents are against it because of their beliefs, I don't think the parents should be allowed to do that, because in that situation, it's not a terminal illness. It's actually a life-saving treatment that they are withholding, and I don't think that that's right for them to make that decision for themselves. I think that should be only something that an adult of sound mind should be able to choose for themselves. Assisted suicide is different. Assisted suicide is actually taking the action of ending a life. I think that that's obviously a little bit more of a controversial topic. In the United States, it's only legal in Oregon. They have the Death with Dignity Act, and even with the Death with Dignity Act, you can't just ask a physician to help you end your life without meeting a lot of criteria. You have to have at least 6 months or less anticipated on your lifespan. You have to be dying of a terminal illness. You have to still be within sound mind to ask for it. You have to get like 2 physicians to sign. They have to say that you are not going through depression and making the choice out of depression, which of course is really hard, because I think most anybody who's dying of a terminal illness, it would be really natural for them to feel depression. So there's a lot of stipulations in place, even for the Death with Dignity Act. And for the other 49 states right now, assisted suicide is not legal. So there, for laws, or those are the laws around assisted suicide, what arguments can be used to support assisted suicide? It can just be simply that someone is suffering, they're in pain, death is inevitable, and they don't want any more days of suffering before that inevitable conclusion. I think that it is really euthanasia more than suicide at that point. And what the second part of the question is, on what grounds might one object to policies allowing withholding of life-saving interventions or assisted suicide? So, those grounds could be religious. A lot of people believe in the sanctity of life to the point where they don't believe that, that any days on earth that you're given should be taken for granted, even if you are suffering. Some people have religious beliefs where they believe suffering is a part of life. It's a lot in life. Some people believe that suffering is, I guess, punishment for original sin. I'm not of that belief myself. I don't think that suffering is something that God wants for us. But people do have that belief, and that's a biblical perspective for some people. Concerning the value of life, yes, life is valuable. Life is a gift. But I do think that we also need to be considering compassion. Compassion for others, treating others as we would want to be treated, and being mindful of suffering, being there for each other in our hour of suffering, tending to the sick, and that's something that Jesus did, and visiting the ill, bringing comfort to the ill in a way that you could look at assisted suicide or euthanasia as those things too. So it depends on your perspective. You can look at it different ways. Obviously, it's a really controversial topic, but I do believe that euthanasia is something that people should have the option of. I don't think that it's something that people should be trying to choose for somebody else. That's not something that you can choose for somebody else. It should only be in a case where the patient is able to make it very, very clear that they are the ones who want it, or that they don't want any more interventions to prolong the inevitable when they are suffering. So those are my statements and thoughts about withholding of treatment and assisted suicide.